Giacomo Casanova, born 1725 in Venice, Italy, renowned for his amorous exploits. Yet his life was so much more than these mere romantic adventures. He was a multifaceted individual with great intelligence and charm to match, excelling in various fields such as librarianship, writing, gambling, and even espionage. Additionally, he had a background in law, mathematics, and was known for his extensive travels and adventures. In fact, he attended the University of Padua, where he demonstrated exceptional proficiency in the fields of science and laws. However, his restless nature and passion for exploration compelled him to embark on extensive travels throughout Europe. Thus, throughout his lifetime, Casanova encountered individuals from many social backgrounds, ranging from nobility to criminals. He also participated in intricate plots, evasions, and, naturally, romantic liaisons. Thus, his name has become synonymous with the art of seduction due to his notorious autobiography, The Story of My Life, which chronicles his escapades and journeys throughout Europe and gives us a captivating glimpse into 18th century society. Well, if that's not an exciting introduction, I don't know what is. Welcome to the channel. For the newcomers, good to meet you, and those returning, we have a very exciting one today. I've looked forward to this for quite some time. As always, supporting the channel is easy as enjoying the content, and I hope that you're already doing that. Otherwise, there's a like and subscribe button which really helps more than you could imagine, and a few links in the description if you feel inclined. But for now, let's get right on to the topic at hand, and that is the life of Casanova. Make yourself nice and comfortable, please. His full name was Giacomo Girolamo Casanova, born in Venice in 1725 to an actress named Zanetta Farusi and Gaetano Casanova, who was also an actor and a rather proficient dancer. He was the eldest among 5 siblings. Now we must note that during this period when Casanova was born, Venice was the place to be, a flourishing and beautiful city, and considered the pleasure capital of Europe. What a place to grow up. Well, it was governed by political and religious conservatives, however, who had a lenient attitude towards social vices and actively promoted tourism. Thus, the destination was an obligatory visit on the grand tour undertaken by young gentlemen reaching maturity, particularly those who belonged to the British nobility. The renowned carnival, gambling establishments, and of course the exquisite courtesans possessed significant allure. The setting offered numerous influential experiences that shaped Casanova's development. Now, about his mother. During her numerous theatre tours in Europe, as we said, she was an actress, Marzia Baldissera, his grandmother, was in charge of taking care of the young Casanova. Unfortunately, he had lost his father at the age of 8 years old. But during his childhood, Casanova experienced strange health issues, such as persistent nosebleeds. But instead of going to a doctor like most people would, his grandmother was a little old-fashioned and thought that they would simply seek assistance from a local witch. Thus they entered a humble dwelling where they encountered an elderly woman seated on a makeshift bed, holding a black cat in her arms while several others surrounded her. Despite the ineffectiveness of the ointment, Casanova was reportedly captivated by the enchantment. In an attempt to alleviate his nosebleeds, which a doctor, when they finally went to see one, attributed to the air quality in Venice, Casanova was sent to a boarding house in Padua on his 9th birthday. Of course, he had harbored a bitter resentment of being neglected by his parents, and just as the information we just recounted from his personal writings, The Story of My Life, he declared about this time in regards to his mother and father, I quote, "I was dismissed." Well, the conditions at the boarding house were, as you can imagine, extremely unpleasant. So he requested to be placed under the supervision of Abbe Gozzi, his main teacher, who provided him with academic instruction, and also taught him how to play the violin. Thus Casanova resided with Gozzi, who was also a priest, by the way, and his family for the majority of his adolescence. Much better than being in the boarding house, that's for sure. Well, at the Gozzi residence, Casanova had his initial encounter with the opposite gender, when, at the age of 11, Gozzi's younger sister apparently engaged in some inappropriate behavior with him. Well, according to his writings, Casanova had remembered that Bettina possessed an attractive appearance to him, a cheerful disposition, and a remarkable ability to comprehend romantic literature, which of course was all the rage at the time. Well, despite lacking a clear understanding of the reason, Casanova was immediately pleased by the girl and wanted to see more of her. She gradually ignited those initial embers of a sentiment in his heart, which eventually evolved into a passion. Despite later getting married, Casanova maintained a lifelong emotional connection to Bettina and the Gozzi family. You never forget your first love, I suppose. Well, Casanova proudly claims to have exhibited a sharp intellect. Just ask him, he'll tell you. Also a strong thirst for knowledge of all kinds and a constant curiosity from a young age. At the age of 12, he enrolled in the University of Padua, completed his studies at age 17, and in 1742 he earned a law degree, despite having an insurmountable dislike for the subject, in his words. The Guardian inspired for him to pursue a career as an ecclesiastical lawyer, which sounds as exciting as it is. In addition to his studies in moral philosophy, chemistry, and mathematics, Casanova demonstrated a strong interest in medicine. He quoted from his diary, "I believe I should have been given the opportunity to pursue my desired career as a physician, where the use of fraudulent practices is even more successful than in the field of law." He regularly administered his own remedies for himself and his acquaintances. During his time at the university, Casanova developed a penchant for gambling, and soon found himself in quite a substantial amount of debt. As a result, his grandmother rather angrily summoned him back to Venice. However, his gambling addiction persisted and became deeply ingrained within him. Upon returning to Venice, he embarked on his career in clerical law, and was granted the title of Abbe after receiving minor orders from the Patriarch of Venice. he commuted regularly between Padua and his university to pursue his studies. At this point, he had reportedly transformed into somewhat of a dandy, the hipster of the time, a tall and swarthy figure with his lengthy hair powdered, centered, and intricately curled. You know the type. While Casanova swiftly gained favor with Alvis Gasparo Malipiero, a 76-year-old Venetian senator, and the proprietor of Palazzo Malipiero, which was conveniently located near Casanova's residence in Venice. This ability to win the hearts and minds of people would become a recurring trait throughout Casanova's life. You see, Malipiero was associating with high society and imparted valuable knowledge to young Casanova regarding fine cuisine, wine, and of course proper social etiquette. Nevertheless, Casanova was discovered engaging in a romantic affair with one Teresa Emer, the actress whom Malipiero intended to seduce himself. Well, of course, Malipiero did not react to this very well. As a result, he expelled both Casanova and Teresa from his residence. Casanova's increasing curiosity about women culminated in his initial full-fledged encounter with two sisters, Nanetta and Marton Savognan, who were 14 and 16 respectively. Times were different, I suppose. Well, these sisters happened to be distant relatives of the Grimanis. Casanova declared that this encounter firmly established his life's vocation. His brief ecclesiastical career was of course marked by scandals. Following the passing of his grandmother, Casanova briefly enrolled in a seminary. However, his financial obligations eventually led to his incarceration for the first time. You see, he declined his mother's attempt to arrange a position for him with Bishop Bernardo de Bernardis after a short evaluation of the conditions in the bishop's Calabrian see. However, he secured a job as a scribe under the influential Cardinal Acquaviva in Rome. When Casanova met Pope Benedict XV, he confidently requested a dispensation to read the forbidden books and to be exempted from eating fish, which he believed caused inflammation in his eyes. Personally, I just can't stand the little bones in it. I've never liked it. Except for salmon. Salmon's all right. Well, after Casanova was wrongly blamed for a scandal involving a couple of lovers, Cardinal Acquaviva fired Casanova, expressing gratitude for his sacrifice, but ultimately terminating his ecclesiastical career. It was over. But I dare say it was not the best career path for him anyway. Well, Casanova purchased a commission to transition into a military officer role for the Republic of Venice as he sought a new profession. Of course, one has to look the part. You can't just go walking in looking like some common vagrant off the street. So he wrote about this in his memoir, and these are the words from the text. Reflecting that there was now little likelihood of my achieving a fortune in my ecclesiastical career, I decided to dress as a soldier. I inquired for a good tailor. He brings me everything I need to impersonate a follower of Mars. My uniform was white, with a blue vest, a shoulder knot of silver and gold, and I bought a long sword and with my handsome cane in hand, a trim hat and black cockade, with my hair cut in side whiskers, and a long false pigtail, I set forth to impress the entire city. He enlisted in a Venetian military unit stationed in Corfu. However, he briefly traveled to Constantinople, supposedly to deliver a letter from his previous employer, the cardinal. Due to his dissatisfaction with the slow pace of his progress and the tedious nature of his responsibilities, he successfully squandered a significant portion of his earnings by engaging in more gambling. Just can't stop, can't he? Well, he promptly relinquished his military vocation and made his way back to Venice. At 21 years old, he embarked upon a journey to pursue a career as a professional gambler, which is, of course, a famously viable career. And it was about as viable for him as it was for everyone else. After losing all of his money he had left from selling his commission, he sought employment from his previous supporter, Alvise Grimani. Thus he embarked on his third occupation as a violinist at the San Samuel Theatre, assuming the role of a lowly journeyman in a magnificent art form, where those who excel are revered, while mediocrity is scorned. Well, he quotes from his diary. Although my profession was not esteemed, I remained indifferent. By indiscriminately labeling everything as prejudice, I quickly adopted all the behaviors of my morally debased fellow musicians. He and his companions frequently wandered through various parts of the city at night, devising and carrying out the most scandalous of pranks. They entertained themselves quite thoroughly by unfastening the gondolas that were tied up in front of people's houses, causing them to float away with the current. In addition, they dispatched midwives and physicians to fictitious emergencies. But of course, his career as a musician was not very satisfying for him, and, dissatisfied with his current situation, he fortuitously intervened to save the life of a noble member of the Bragadin family in Venice. You see, this nobleman had suffered a stroke while riding in a gondola with Casanova after attending a wedding ball. They promptly ceased the senator's bloodletting. Subsequently, within the premises of the senator's palace, a medical practitioner performed bloodletting on the senator once more and administered a mercury-based ointment, which was a widely used but poisonous remedy at the period, onto the senator's chest. Of course, they didn't know it was poisonous at the time. Well, you just have to do what you can with what you have back then. Well, as a result, his body temperature increased significantly, and he experienced a severe fever. Additionally, Bragadin seemed to be struggling to breathe due to the swelling of his windpipe. A priest was summoned when it appeared that death was imminent. Nevertheless, disregarding the objections of the attending physician, Casanova commanded the elimination of the ointment and the cleansing of the senator's chest with cold water. The senator recuperated from his illness through adequate rest and a prudent diet. Due to his young age and his effortless ability to recite medical knowledge, the senator and his two unmarried companions believed that Casanova was exceptionally wise for his age, and deduced that he must possess some kind of mysterious and esoteric knowledge. Due to their shared interest in Kabbalism, the senator extended an invitation to Casanova to join his household and become a patron for the rest of Casanova's life. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. Certainly. Well, Casanova wrote about this in his memoirs, and this is what he said. I took the most creditable, the noblest, and the only natural course. I decided to put myself in a position where I need no longer go without the necessity of life. And what those necessities were for me, no one could judge better than myself. No one in Venice could understand how an intimacy could exist between myself and 3 other men of their character. They all heaven, and I all earth. They most severe in their morals, and I addicted to every kind of dissolute living. During the following 3 years, Casanova enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle as a legal assistant under the senator's support. He dressed splendidly, and, in accordance with his nature, devoted a significant portion of his time to gambling and, of course, pursuing those romantic relationships. Well, unfortunately, things caught up with him. Now, someone had accused him of assault and reported the incident to the authorities. Subsequently, Casanova was exonerated of this offense, however, due to insufficient evidence. Well, he didn't really get to hear much of it, because he had already absconded from Venice at that point. It really makes you think. Perhaps he just thought the writing was on the wall, someone was trying to set him up. Well, he went and sought refuge in Parma, and at this time, in true form, he engaged in a romantic relationship with a French woman, whom he effectively called Henriette. Now, this affair lasted for 3 months, and is considered to be one of the most profound and intense loves that he ever encountered. You see, Henriette, according to Casanova, possessed a unique combination of physical attractiveness, intellectual prowess, and refined cultural sensibilities. According to him, from his diary, they believe that a woman is incapable of making a man equally happy all the 24 hours a day, have never known a Henriette. Now the joy which flooded my soul was far greater when I conversed with her during the day than when I held her in my arms at night. Having read a great deal, and having natural taste, Henriette judged rightly of everything. With her intensive reading and innate sense of aesthetics, she accurately assessed everything. In addition, she displayed keen discernment in evaluating Casanova himself. Well, feeling deeply disappointed and discouraged, Casanova returned to Venice after things didn't work out. However, after experiencing a successful series of gambling wins, he regained his confidence and embarked on an extensive journey, eventually arriving in Paris in 1750. During his journey between towns, he engaged in more romantic encounters that resembled the complexity of plots found in operas. While in Lyon, he joined the Freemasonry Society, which captivated his fascination with clandestine rituals. This society primarily attracted individuals of high influence and intelligence, who proved to be advantageous in his life by offering valuable connections and unrestricted knowledge. While in Lyon, Casanova became a companion and eventually attained the highest rank of the Scottish Rite Master Mason. He resided in Paris for the duration of 2 years, during which he acquired proficiency in the local language, dedicated a significant amount of time to attending theatrical performances, and made acquaintances with prominent individuals. However, the police in Paris soon became aware of his numerous romantic relationships, just as they did in almost every city that he traveled to. In 1752, he and his brother Francesco thus relocated from Paris to Dresden, where their mother and sister resided. Now, the play La Moulin, which is unfortunately no longer in our presence, was staged at the Royal Theatre, a venue where his mother frequently portrayed prominent characters. After this, he traveled to Prague and back to Vienna, where he found the stricter moral environment to be unfavorable. In 1753, he ultimately arrived back in Venice. He then continued his amorous adventures, acquiring numerous adversaries and attracting the attention of the Venetian inquisitors, which of course, the original fun police. Now, his criminal record steadily grew with documented instances of blasphemy, seduction, which of course was a crime back then, altercations, and public disputes. Giovanni Manucci, a government operative, was tasked with extracting Casanova's expertise in cabalism and Freemasonry, as well as scrutinizing his connection of banned literature. Senator Bragadin, being a former inquisitor himself, earnestly advised him to depart without delay, or else endure severe repercussions. And so, 3 years later, on July 26, 1755, at the age of 30 at this point, Casanova was apprehended for showing disrespect towards religion and societal norms. The tribunal, after acknowledging the serious offenses committed by Casanova, particularly his public acts of blasphemy against the sacred religion, ordered his arrest and confinement. Now, he was confined in a prison called the Leads, which is one consisting of 7 cells located on the upper floor of the east wing of the Palace of the Doge of Venice, specifically designed for prisoners of higher social standing and certain categories of offenders, among them being usurers, political prisoners, and defrocked or libertine priests or monks. Now, this name, the Leads, was derived from the lead plates that covered the roof of the palace. Well, after a few weeks, September 12th, he was sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment, without even a trial, and he wasn't even informed of the reasons for his arrest or the details of the sentence. He was assigned to a solitary room equipped with clothing, a pallet bed, a table, an armchair, which was considered the most unfavorable among all of the cells, and that's saying something. Well, in this room he endured significant hardships due to lack of light, intense summer heat, and an overwhelming infestation of fleas. Subsequently, he was placed in the company of a succession of fellow inmates. Following a period of 5 months, and a direct request from Count Bragadin, he was provided with cozy winter bedding, and a regular allowance for purchasing books and improving his diet. While taking exercise walks in the prison attic, he discovered a fragment of black marble and an iron rod, which he stuffed into his clothes and secretly brought back to his cell. He concealed the rod inside the armchair. Now, during a period of time when he did not have any fellow inmates, he dedicated weeks to honing the metal bar into a pointed object using a stone. Subsequently, he commenced excavating the wooden floor beneath his bed, fully aware that his prison cell was directly positioned above the chamber of the Inquisitor. Merely 72 hours prior to his planned evasion amidst a festive occasion, when the presence of authorities in the lower chamber would be absent, Casanova was transferred to a more spacious and illuminated confinement, which offered him a scenic outlook. The relocation occurred despite his objections, asserting contentment with his previous situation. Within his recently assigned prison cell, he describes his state of being as resembling a stupor. Immobilized like a statue, he realized that all efforts he had exerted were in vain, and he is unable to feel remorse for them. He goes on to say in his memoirs that he experienced a profound sense of despair, believing that there was no reason to anticipate a positive outcome. The only solace he had was to deliberately avoid contemplating the fate that lay ahead of him. But you can't keep a good man down. He devised a new strategy to flee. He sought assistance from the inmate in the neighboring cell, Father Balbi, a priest who had abandoned his religious duties. The spike was transported to the new cell concealed within the armchair, and subsequently handed over to the priest, who had concealed it within a folio Bible. The Bible was then cleverly hidden beneath a large plate of pasta, unbeknownst to the deceived jailer. While the priest was creating an opening in his own ceiling, traversed it, and then created another opening in the ceiling of Casanova's cell. Thus Casanova employed psychological manipulation to subdue his new cellmate, who happened to be a spy, by exploiting his superstitious beliefs and instilling fear in him, thereby rendering him incapable of speaking. Upon Balbi's successful breach into Casanova's cell, Casanova ascended through the ceiling, abandoning a note that contained a quotation from the 117th Psalm of the Latin Vulgate, stating, "I shall not perish, but instead survive, and proclaim the deeds of the Lord." The spy didn't come with him. He chose to stay behind, and was too terrified of the potential repercussions if he were apprehended while attempting to flee alongside the others. But Casanova and Balbi skillfully maneuvered their way past the lead plates and onto the inclined roof of the Doge's palace, amidst a dense fog. Due to the significant difference in height between the drop and the nearby canal, Casanova forcefully opened the gate covering a dormer window and shattered the glass in order to gain access. They discovered an extended ladder on the rooftop. With the aid of a bedsheet rope that Casanova had prepared, they descended into the room situated 25 feet beneath them. After a period of rest until morning, they proceeded to change their clothes. Subsequently, they forcefully opened a small lock on the exit door and made their way into a corridor within the palace. They navigated through various galleries and chambers and descended a flight of stairs. By persuading the guard that they had unintentionally been trapped inside the palace following an official event, they exited through the final door. Very clever. What an adventure, my goodness. Well, at 6 a.m., they made their getaway using a gondola in true Venetian fashion. Now, finally, Casanova arrived in Paris on the 5th of January, 1757, coinciding with Robert Francois Damien's assassination attempt on Louis XV, while Casanova would subsequently observe and recount his execution, never one to miss a top public event, of course. Now, in this year, later on of 1787, 30 years after the events took place, Casanova penned the story of My Flight, which is a highly acclaimed work that garnered widespread popularity and was subsequently translated into multiple languages. He recounts the tale in his memoirs. Thus God did provide me with what I needed for an escape, which was to be a wonder if not a miracle. I admit, I'm proud of it, but my pride does not come from my having succeeded, for luck had a good deal to do with that. It comes from having concluded that the thing could be done, and having the courage to undertake it. Well, recognizing the potential length of his stay in Paris, he acted accordingly by understanding that in order to achieve his goals, he needed to utilize all of his physical and moral abilities, establish connections with influential individuals, maintain strong self-discipline, and adapt to different situations. He had developed and grown more sophisticated. During his time in Paris, he relied on his ability to think quickly and take decisive action, but he also became more strategic and careful in his approach. The initial objective he had was to locate a fresh benefactor. He thus re-established contact with his former acquaintance de Bernice, who currently held the position of Foreign Minister of France. He thus received counsel from his benefactor to seek a method of generating funds for the government in order to swiftly gain approval. Casanova quickly assumed the role of a trustee for the inaugural state lottery and emerged as one of its most successful ticket vendors. The business venture rapidly generated a substantial fortune for him. Now, armed with this wealth, he socialized with influential individuals, and of course, engaged in new romantic pursuits rather. Well, perhaps disputes as well, who knows. Well, using his exceptional memory, he deceived numerous socialites, including Marquis Jean d'Urfé, by exploiting his knowledge of occult practices, specifically his master of numerology, which gave him an aura of mystical power. Now, according to Casanova, tricking a foolish person is a commendable achievement for a clever individual. Now, at the onset of the 7 Years' War, Casanova was once again summoned to assist in augmenting the state treasury. He was given the responsibility of selling state bonds in Amsterdam, which was the financial hub of Europe at the time. He managed to sell the bonds at a mere 8% markdown. In the subsequent year, he had accumulated enough wealth to establish a silk manufacturing facility using his profits. Not bad. Now, the French government extended an offer to grant him a title and a pension in exchange for his acquisition of French citizenship and service to the finance ministry. However, he didn't want it. He declined it, possibly due to his desire for exploration and travel. Casanova had attained the pinnacle of his wealth, but was unable to maintain any of it. He managed to do the business ineffectively, accumulating significant debt in an attempt to salvage his losses, and allocated a substantial portion of his wealth towards engaging in more romantic liaisons with female employees, who he actually referred to as his harem. Gee, you wouldn't get away with that these days, wouldn't you? My goodness. Well, Casanova was incarcerated once more due to his outstanding debts. Now, he was released, however, just 4 days later, thanks to the persistent efforts of the Marquis d'Urf. Regrettably, despite his release, his benefactor de Bernice was terminated by Louis XV during that period, and Casanova once again found himself surrounded by his adversaries. He liquidated his remaining possessions and obtained a new assignment in Holland in order to separate himself from these difficulties. On this occasion, his mission was unsuccessful, and he escaped to Cologne, then Stuttgart, in the spring of 1760, where he subsequently lost any of the wealth that he managed to have left. Once more, arrested due to his outstanding debts again, but he did evade capture, and he fled to Switzerland. Feeling tired and dissatisfied with his indulgent lifestyle, Casanova paid a visit to the monastery of Einsiedeln, where he contemplated the modest and intellectual life of a monk. Now, upon his return to the hotel he was staying at, he contemplated the decision at hand. Which way should he go? However, guess what? He was unexpectedly captivated by a new object of desire, causing him to abandon any thoughts of leading a monastic life and succumb to his primal instincts. Didn't take much, didn't it? While continuing his journey, he paid visits to Albrecht von Haller and Voltaire, and subsequently arrived in Marseille, then Genoa, Florence, Rome, Naples, Modena, and Turin, and all the way taking as many chances as he could to engage in more of those romantic encounters. From 1760 onwards, he adopted the title of Chevalier de Saint-Gall, which he would continue to use throughout his life. At times, he would adopt the title of Count de Ferrucci, using his mother's family name, if you remember from the start of the video. Additionally, when Pope Clement XIII bestowed upon Casanova the Papal Order of the Golden Spur, he received a remarkable cross and ribbon to showcase upon his chest. Upon returning to Paris, he embarked on one of his most audacious endeavors, which involved persuading the Marquis d'Urf that he possessed the ability to transform him into a young man using his occult magical methods. Well, Casanova's plan unfortunately failed to provide him with the significant financial gain he had anticipated, leading the Marquis to ultimately lose confidence in him. Well, it was worth a shot. Now, in 1763, Casanova actually journeyed to England with the intention of presenting his proposal for a national lottery to the British authorities. In his writings, he described the English as possessing a distinct character that is shared by the entire nation, leading them to believe in their superiority over others. It is a universally held belief among all nations, with each nation considering itself to be the superior one. and they all are correct. His words. Now, utilizing his connections, he managed to ascend to an audience with George III, leveraging the majority of the valuable items he had pilfered from the Marquis d'Urfé. While engaging in political maneuvers, he also devoted a significant amount of time to his habitual activities in the bedroom. In order to seek female companions for his personal gratification, despite his inability to communicate in English, he placed a newspaper advertisement offering to rent an apartment to the suitable candidate. Well, I don't know many people who would do that, but that is interesting. Well, he conducted interviews with numerous young women, and ultimately he selected a candidate named Mistress Pauline, who was apparently well suited to his preferences. Shortly after, he made himself at home in her apartment and successfully charmed her. It was these and other romantic relationships, however, that left him debilitated with transmitted infections, and he departed England in a state of poverty and illness. He proceeded to the Austrian Netherlands, recuperated, and subsequently embarked on a 3-year journey across Europe, traversing approximately 4,500 miles by carriage on very rugged roads. His travels extended as far as Moscow and St. Petersburg, with an average daily distance of about 30 miles covered by coach. Once again, his primary objective was to market his lottery scheme to other governments to replicate the remarkable triumph he achieved with the French government. However, his meeting with Frederick the Great proved to be a complete waste of time, and he encountered the same outcome in the neighboring German territories. While with an abundance of both social connections and self-assurance, Casanova traveled to Russia and had a meeting with Catherine the Great. However, she decisively rejected the proposal of implementing a lottery. And in 1766, he was banished from Warsaw after engaging in a pistol duel with Colonel Franciszek Braniski over an Italian actress who was a mutual acquaintance. Both combatants sustained injuries, with Casanova specifically wounded in his left hand. But the hand spontaneously healed, despite Casanova's rejection of the doctor's suggestion to amputate it. He journeyed from Warsaw to Breslau in the Kingdom of Prussia, and then proceeded to Dresden, where he acquired another venereal infection. In 1767, he went back to Paris and spent several months indulging in gambling at the saloons. However, he was ultimately forced to leave France by the direct command of Louis XV. Imagine the king specifically telling you that you have to get out of the country. Can't argue with that. Now, it was mainly due to that fraudulent scheme with the Marquis d'Urfé. Casanova's reputation for reckless behavior had also spread all through Europe, making it rather challenging for him to overcome his notoriety and have anybody assist him in amassing any form of wealth. Consequently, he decided to go as far away from all of that as possible, and traveled to Spain, where his reputation was not as widely known. He employed his customary strategy, relying on strategically positioned connections, frequently Freemasons, socializing and entertaining influential nobles, and ultimately orchestrating a meeting with the regional sovereign, specifically Charles III in this instance. Well, despite his efforts, he found himself unable to secure any opportunities, and was left to wander aimlessly throughout Spain, achieving very little. While in Barcelona, he narrowly evaded an assassination attempt and subsequently served a 6-week prison sentence. After his unsuccessful Spanish expedition, he briefly returned to France, before moving on to Italy. He had to make arrangements for his return to Venice while he was in Rome, during the period when Casanova was awaiting his supporters, as few of them as there was, to secure his legal entry into Venice. He commenced the task of translating the Iliad into modern Tuscan Italian. That is the work by Homer, by the way. Also writing his History of the Troubles in Poland, and also composing a comic play. He engaged in commercial espionage to try to curry favor with the Venetian authorities, but nevertheless, after several months, without a recall, he composed a letter of appeal addressed directly to the inquisitors, because of course they were the moral authority. Finally, after many back and forths, he obtained the permission he had been so eagerly seeking, and was overwhelmed with emotion as he read the words, "We, inquisitors of the state, for reasons within our knowledge, grant Giacomo Casanova a free, safe conduct, authorizing him to freely travel, stay, and return, and communicate wherever he desires without any obstacle or restriction. That is our determination." Thus, on September of 1774, Casanova was granted permission to go back to Venice, following a period of 18 years in exile. There's no place like home. Now, initially, his homecoming to Venice was warm and friendly, and he was widely recognized as a prominent figure, and the inquisitors themselves were eager to learn the details of that prison escape. Well, out of the 3 unmarried individuals who supported him, only Dandolo remained alive, and Casanova received an invitation to return and reside with him. He was granted a modest stipend by Dandolo, and aspired to sustain himself through his literary works. However, it proved to be insufficient. Reluctantly, he resumed his role as a correspondent for Venice, receiving payment on the number of articles he produced. His reports focused on religion, morals, and commerce, primarily relying on hearsay and gossip gathered from his social acquaintances. He experienced a feeling of dissatisfaction. He did not encounter any appealing financial prospects, and had limited social opportunities compared to his previous experiences. Well, by the time he reached 49, the consequences of his carefree lifestyle and extensive journeys had significantly affected his well-being. The scars from the smallpox, sunken cheeks, and the general poor health of Casanova became increasingly obvious. His previously relaxed demeanor began to become a lot more cautious, racked with worry. Now, we said there's no place like home, and that's generally true. But at this time, at least for Casanova, Venice was not what it used to be. Well, Casanova's financial resources for gambling were also limited, and he had a scarcity of desirable women to pursue, and a lack of acquaintances to stimulate his reckless and impulsive inclinations, long gone from the day where he and his buddies would run amok. Like I said, it's not what it used to be. He learned about the passing of his mother, and even more distressing, he went to see Bettina Gozzi on the deathbed. She was that person who had initially introduced him to his main hobby, and she died while he was holding her hand. Now, the Iliad, that work of Homer translated by him, was published in 3 volumes, but it had a restricted number of subscribers and had generated minimal financial returns. He engaged in a public disagreement with Voltaire regarding religion, too. When he acquired, imagine a scenario where you achieve the eradication of superstition. What will you use as a replacement? And Voltaire had retorted, I like that. When I deliver humanity from a ferocious beast which devours it, can I be asked what I shall put in its place? Well, of course, from Casanova's point of view, if Voltaire had been, I quote, a proper philosopher, he would have kept silent on that subject. He also said that the people need to live in ignorance for the general peace of the nation. Well, that's an interesting point of view. Well, in 1799, Casanova encountered Francesca, a seamstress lacking formal education, who subsequently became his cohabiting paramour and domestic caretaker, displaying unwavering affection towards him. Subsequently, the inquisitors employed him and dispatched him to scrutinize the trade activities between the Papal States and Venice. After publishing and theatre endeavors were unsuccessful, mainly due to a shortage of funds, Casanova was expelled from Venice once more in 1783, following the composition of a scathing satire that mocked the Venetian nobility. Of course, this only exacerbated his decline, being thrown out of his comfortable home like this. During that event, he publicly declared as well that Grimani was his biological father, which was his sole statement on the matter. Now, compelled to complete his journey, Casanova arrived in Paris, and in November of 1783 he encountered, guess who? Benjamin Franklin, while attending a lecture on aeronautics and the prospects of balloon transportation. He also briefly held the positions of secretary and pamphleteer for Sebastian Foscarini, who was the Venetian ambassador in Vienna. Well, following Foscarini's demise in 1785, Casanova embarked on a quest to secure a new position, and after a few months he assumed the role of librarian to Count Joseph Karl von Waldstein, who served as a chamberlain to the emperor at the castle of Dux in Bohemia, which is now known as the Czech Republic, by the way. Now the Count, who was a Freemason, a frequent traveller, and Kabbalist, had developed an affinity for Casanova after their encounter a year ago at Foscarini's house. Despite the job providing stability and a generous salary, Casanova characterizes his final years as boring and monotonous, although it proved to be fruitful for his writing endeavors. But his health had significantly worsened, and he found this little country life among all the peasants to be quite uninteresting. He could only make infrequent visits to Vienna and Dresden for respite, and despite his amicable relationship with the Count, his employer was a significantly younger individual who possessed his own idiosyncrasies. The Count frequently disregarded him during meals and neglected to introduce him to significant visiting dignitaries. In addition, Casanova was widely despised by the majority of the other residents of the Castle of Dux. His sole companions appeared to be his fox terriers. Well, overwhelmed by this hopelessness, he contemplated ending his life, but ultimately resolved to persevere in order to chronicle his life story, a task he diligently pursued until his demise. Well, he frequented Prague, the capital and primary cultural hub of Bohemia, on numerous occasions, and during October 1787 he encountered Lorenzo da Ponte, the writer of the text for Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. He was in Prague at this time while the opera was being performed on its first premiere. It is probable that he also had the opportunity to meet the composer during this encounter, but we don't really know. But there is evidence to suggest that he was present in Prague in 1791 during the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II as King of Bohemia. During his visit to Prague in 1787, Casanova is reputed to have written a dialogue which was appropriate for the Don Juan drama. However, none of his verses were ultimately included in Mozart's Don Giovanni. Well, in 1797, news had arrived that the Republic of Venice had ceased to exist, and that Napoleon Bonaparte had captured Casanova's hometown. Returning home was no longer possible. Casanova thus passed away on June 4th, 1798, at the age of 73. His last words: "I have lived as a philosopher, and I die as a Christian." He was interred in Dux, which is now known as Duchkov in the Czech Republic. Unfortunately, the precise whereabouts of his grave have been lost to history. Well, what a story! We all know the name Casanova, but wow! I really enjoyed doing that one. I told you I was looking forward to it. I'd like to thank all my top-tier patrons: Dark, Carrie, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, and Wendy. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining me. More exciting videos coming up. But let's all go and have a good rest now. I think we all need it after that one. Good night, everybody. Lots of love to you all.